Journalist and author Melinda Ferguson says while she has been touched by the love and support received, she felt misunderstood by the criticism received. This comes after releasing her controversial book, When Love Kills, the tragic tale of AKA and Anele. The story is told through Ferguson's eyes, taking readers on the life and times of Anele Tembe and Kiernan, also known as AKA Forbes. Ferguson believes there were alleged previous occurrences that led to Anele Tembe's death when she fell from the 10th floor of a hotel in Cape Town 3 years ago. But to find out more about the book, Melinda Ferguson joins us virtually. We've also reached out to Tony Forbes, that's AKA's father, without any success, and also to Moses Tembe's legal representative, who confirmed that he was also unavailable at this time. So, Melinda, good to have you. Thank you very, very much for joining us here on the program.
I feel like I'm the only idiot who's agreed to talk. I mean, I'm one of those people, you know, I'm not afraid to tell what I believe.
Well, I'm glad that you have. Well, in fact, I suppose it is obvious in a way that you would sort of come forward. It is a book that you have written. It's words that you've put together. So it's important, I suppose, to hear your voice when it comes to this book as well. Why did you write it? Why did you decide to go there?
I mean, Leanne, this is the biggest media story since Oscar Pistorius's trial, since the murder of Reeva Steenkamp. For me, as a journalist, I think it's one of those stories, and as a woman specifically, that was screaming to be told. You know, a lot of people have said, what about bad timing? AKA was only killed just over a year ago. For me, Anele Tembe died 3 years ago. That is one of my concerns, is that there hasn't been clarity about what happened at the Pepper Club back in April 2021. Tragically, AKA was gunned down in February last year, but I don't think there's ever the right timing for these types of books. I think that if I did this in 10 years' time, there might not be as much noise, but there would certainly be resistance again. So for me, as a journalist, I was very disturbed. I was very affected by the violent way that both of them lost their lives. And for me, it was like a very toxic Romeo and Juliet love story. All the modern elements of drugs, of alcohol, of violence, of social media. And I thought that it was a great opportunity for me to put down the story and try and sort of find out what had happened, even if I don't know exactly, like none of us do, because both Anele and AKA are no longer with us.
Absolutely, and I suppose that's where the criticism does come in. The book really does go in. I'm not going to go into detail in the book, and you talk very much so about the life and times of both of them, of Anele as a young girl growing up, Kiernan, their circumstances, what they were like, their growth, all of that kind of stuff you do go into. So for people who don't know them, it's a great reference to go and have a look at it. But let's get to the night in question, because I think that's the nitty-gritty, and in the interest of time, that I suppose is what we want to talk about. So yes, nobody was there, and it is difficult, and I suppose the criticism that's been leveled against you is, why is it your story to tell when there's no inquest, there's been no proof, we don't even know if drugs were actually involved, we haven't seen them. There's a whole lot of question marks, and yet there's so many theories that have been put together in this book. I suppose that's where the criticism comes. How do you explain that away?
I don't think it's my story to tell. In fact, I'm publishing this book with NB Publishers. They are my joint venture company. I said to them, don't put my name on the cover of this book. I think this book is an important book, but it's not my story. You know, in the end, it was decided that I had to have my name on the cover. I wanted it at the back, written and compiled by Melinda Ferguson. I think it's a story for the nation. I think it's a story about tragedy. I think it's a story about gender-based violence both ways. I think it's a huge public interest story. It isn't my story. It is a story that is important for people, I think, to see, even though we don't have the inquest yet, because it keeps getting delayed, and I'm talking about the inquest into Anele Tembe's death. Even though the court case of the AKA assassination has barely started, we've seen how slow the wheels of justice turn in this country. I mean, we keep seeing Senzo Meyiwe. how long, since 10 years, I think it's since Sensor was killed, and we still don't really know what was going on. So if I had to wait for all these court cases to take place, which might just keep on getting delayed, I just think like, well, for me, I felt that the story to this point was an important story.
Yeah.
I've said before that like a prequel to Breaking Bad, that TV series on Netflix, you have Better Call Saul. And to be quite blatant, for me, this is almost the prequel to the justice, and I put that in inverted commas, to the court cases, the inquests that are still about to take place.
Well, certainly, I suppose we will look back on it and say, well, this aged very well or this aged terribly, because it may be right, it may be wrong. I suppose it is hard, though, when you do read the book, and I have read every single word in the book, so I do feel quite confident speaking to you, because there's nothing worse than talking to someone and having not read the book. But there is one part that makes me feel quite uncomfortable, and that is an alternative deadly scenario. It's a chapter where, yes, we've spoken through the facts, what was said on social media, what's been spoken about, but then there's a chapter that's kind of almost like an opinion. I don't know if it's your opinion of what happened that night. Just one sentence. But what if things had happened differently? What if, contrary to what Kiernan claimed, he had indeed killed Anele in that club after hours and hours of arguing, of screaming, swearing, endless accusations around infidelity, after hours of verbal belittling and battering, perhaps with added influence of alcohol and drugs, did Kiernan grab Anele in a moment of uncontrolled rage because she would not stop badgering and taunting him? And so it goes on. Do you not think that this is perhaps, going too far by putting a story out there that we don't know as a fact, or do you know this as a fact?
I've looked at the evidence, and it's very clear evidence that I've seen. I mean, it's going to be used in the inquest. Some of it was leaked last year, so it's not out of the public realm. And the evidence gave me a lot of confidence to pose the scenario. I might not have been there. None of us will ever really know what happened. But for example, there was a lot of blood in the room. Anele Tembe's fingerprints were never on the balustrade. If she had killed herself, how would she have gotten up? And I've been to the Pepper Club. The balustrade on the balcony is actually quite high. She would have had to have lifted herself up. She would have left fingerprints, and she would have had to have jumped. The place where Anele Tembe landed on the street below at the Pepper Club was 5.5 meters from the building. If she had done the jump herself, they've done all the logistics. I mean, this is not just me making this up. She would have probably fallen 2, maybe 2.5 meters from the building. These are just two small, well, they're not small, they're enormous. These are two enormous red flags. So as a writer, I took the liberty, and I agree, I did take a certain amount of liberty by proposing a scenario. The scenario will never be able to be proved exactly, but there is a good chance that things that happened in the room between the two of them went out of control. I don't believe Anele Tembe killed herself. Then one has to say, well, then there must have been foul play. And I hope the inquest that's going to be finally, please, that it will no longer be delayed, will show us proper evidence that will support my scenario.
Okay, so let's look at that and further talk to that. I have heard, obviously you speak, and every journalist does have their own sources. Do you have sources that told you exactly what happened that night?
The only two sources who will tell you exactly what happened were Anele and Kiernan.
Indeed.
That's the truth.
And as we know, Melinda, I mean, they're not here, but do you have anybody that was, obviously I know about the witness that was across that saw what happened. Yeah, and he's in the book. You speak about that, and we know that he is, hopefully going to be a part of the inquest, even though his police statement was nowhere to be found. And, that is a problem. He was there on the ground with Anele, and he obviously said he never saw AKA coming through. But do you have witnesses that were inside, around the room, listening, knowing what happened? Or is this just a visualization of what might have happened from previous experiences of people? And you go brilliantly into it. These very toxic relationships. I mean, you bring up Rihanna and gosh, help me out here. What's his name again?
Chris Brown.
Thank you, Chris Brown. You go into that. Yeah. You talk about their relationship. You talk about the Oscar relationship as well. You talk about very toxic relationships, and you basket this relationship with that. However, do you have formal evidence that this actually happened? Or again, I ask you, is this a theory you came up with?
I watched the Tembe Kiernan interview where I relied heavily on what Kiernan himself said about the fighting, about the engagement ring being thrown off. I watched that interview. It was a brilliant source for me because it was the only time we really got to hear AKA say what happened there. The details that I also seeded in, I did get information from people who were either there or who knew of people who were there. So I never said this is exactly what happened. I've said imagine if.
Okay.
People are very scared of being identified. People are terrified to talk out against Tony Forbes. Even though there are whisperings and I've been whispered to, I gave my absolute promise on my life, on my children's lives, that I would never divulge my sources, and I will not do that.
And fair enough, that's not something I would ever ask you, but I imagine and hope that those people, those sources you speak of, will go to the inquest and relay the story so there can be justice. One person, however, and this is a new thing, is of course the involvement of Anele's father, Moses Tembe. You released a statement, it was yesterday or the day before, just saying that, there have been allegations that perhaps he may have funded this, he may have given money for this, and that he was involved. I mean, you quoted him quite a lot in the book. You had a conversation with him. Is it true? The stuff that you said, he said, and there's a lot said from him. Did you sit down with him? Tell us about that conversation.
I had a few conversations with Moses. The first time I met him, I actually met him with Rob Stefanato. I was very, very fortunate to get a meeting, a sit down with Moses Tembe and Rob Stefanato. And if the listeners or viewers rather don't know who he is, he's the witness who heard the terrible screaming of Anele Tembe, and then within a second or two he heard a huge bang on the pavement, which he thought was the gun going off actually, but it was her body dropping. And so I sat for maybe 3-4 hours with the two of them, and I spoke to Moses a number of times afterwards, like on a Zoom meeting, on other platforms. And I was quite distressed when I saw the Tembe family spokesman say that Moses had not contributed or commissioned the book. Hence, I brought out a clarification statement yesterday or the day before saying Moses willingly and voluntarily took part in my in the book in terms of what I asked him about the loss of his daughter, about Anele Tembe's life. But he did not financially contribute or commission this book.
Okay, fair enough. So that's their side. Because when you do read it, you do see that...
Are we still online?
Yes, very much so. I can hear you clearly. I hope you can still hear me. This is a very partial...
Yeah, I can now.
It is a partial story towards Anele. And I know that you are taking the victim side. We can feel that. So, I mean, there's a lot that was said by Moses Tembe. Some of the stuff about... he'd seen him standing, and then it talks about AKA didn't come down. Instead, he phoned to order a bottle of tequila, and he was drinking. So he didn't come and see she was alive for 20 minutes. Those are the kind of things. Moses Tembe is saying Kiernan's back was full of scratches. Anele's nails were broken. There was blood from Anele on the room floor, splatters. So there is a lot quoting him. What about AKA's version of events? What about his parents? I know you had a relationship with Lynn Forbes, his mum. Did they contribute anything? They said they didn't, obviously, but did you speak to them? Did you give them a voice?
You know, Aliane, I think it's actually time that I give a bit of background, and I've been really avoidant, mainly due to actually trying to do this with grace, because Forbeses have definitely come out quite aggressively against me, saying it's opportunistic, it's distasteful. I met Lynn Forbes in 2017 or 2018. She attended one of my writing courses that I regularly gave in Joburg, and she wanted to write a book. And I said to her, and that was long before Anele Tembe and AKA, I said to her at that course, Lynn, the book that everybody wants to read is Being AKA's Mom. Like Kanye West's mom, Donda, did the book. I said, you're the mother of a hip-hop star. And that's where the conversation ended. Lynn wanted to write a book about herself, and nothing ever happened. Then after Kiernan, her son, was tragically killed, about 5 months after that, Lynn reached out to me in July last year and said to me she wanted to write a book, and she would like me to be her ghostwriter. So one of the things I'd like to just point out is that they say it's opportunistic of me and the timing is so bad, but AKA's mom herself, 5 months after her son died, reached out to me. And the two of us struck up an amazing relationship. I mean, the two of us were really close. I've got hours and hours and hours of recorded material. I did a lot of work with Lynn. Towards the end of last year, something happened that I can't disclose what. I'm sorry, but I can't for legal purposes. But all I can say is the aim of the two books, of the book, became kind of divergent with what Lynn had signed up with my publishing company, NB Publishers. The original book that we had agreed on was no longer comfortable for Lynn. And therefore, we sent her a cancellation of agreement. No one has heard this in this detail. You, Leanne, have managed to pull it out of me. I can't say what the book was called. I can't say what it was about. But the two of us seemed to... And then I said to her, I'm going to write the journalistic approach. Please, would you participate? I told her I was talking to Moses Tembe. Lynn completely then withdrew from me. And I'm very sad because I think her voice would have been unbelievable in this book, but I gave her so much opportunity and she chose not to.
All right. Well, I mean, that's quite a bombshell, but a very important one. I have to ask you, court cases, challenges. I know you speak of death threats you've gotten, but have any courts? Have you been sued for this? I know there've been threats, but is it happening?
I'm looking at you and I'm going, no. I'm very grateful. I mean, there was talk of the book being indicted, the interdict being brought. We heard that very, very strongly. There was great talk about that, but we got the book out. For me, I would ask, if I was watching this, is why do people not want this book out? Like, what is it in this book that is so offensive? Because the Forbeses brought the statement out before they even read the book. I don't even know if they've read the book yet. A day after my cover was leaked, and it was leaked on social media by somebody, and I have no idea who, I was kind of felt ambushed by a statement that the Forbeses brought out, saying all these distasteful, opportunistic. And I just thought to myself, but have you even read what I've written?
Yep.
I pay great homage to their son as the most amazing hip-hop producer, artist, and all the rest.
Melinda, I would do anything to speak to you more, but I got to wrap, unfortunately. I'm loving where this is going, and I wish we had more time. Melinda Ferguson, journalist, author, about this book, When Love Kills. It's out, it's there. Read it for yourself. You can decide what you think about this, but it is a tragic tale of AKA and Anele, but there's a lot more to it than just their love story. There's the talk of toxic relationships, drug abuse, GBV, you name it, it's covered here. So yeah, go for it.